Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Zach, and this is episode 545 of the Lawyers Podcast, part of the Legal Talk Network. Today, Stephanie talks to Rho Thomas about lawyers getting out of debt. So, Stephanie, we've had a lot of talk about flat fee billing, alternative fee structures. You and I have discussed how artificial intelligence is kind of exacerbating this tension between the billable hour and kind of our obligation to use technology and to be more efficient and a little bit quicker. So we've got a flat fee webinar or alternative fee webinar coming up soon.
Yeah, this will be a fun chance to join me on March 12th. We're going to do a webinar on talking about alternative fee structures, maybe some basics of why. A good reminder if you haven't heard me say it enough, but we'll just do a quick reminder on why we shouldn't be billing by the hour, but then really kind of digging into, okay, what if I want to play with this? What if I want to test it out? What are some initial steps I can take? How can I think about pricing it and getting started with it? So I hope people really leave with the first couple of steps beyond just, yeah, I know this is a good idea.
Right, because it's one thing to just say, hey, you should be doing alternative fee structures or you should be doing flat fee billing. When you actually bring it into the law office, people go, well, that doesn't work for my office. That doesn't work for how I practice. That's great for everybody else, but that doesn't work for how I practice. I have rarely found somebody that I couldn't figure out a way to adjust their fee method after talking with them, So I think I think that's something that we dig into when we talk about this as well.
Absolutely. I'm kind of like, challenge accepted. And, maybe, of course, maybe there is a time and place where a billable hour really does make the most sense, but there's also lots of places where it doesn't. And so, and here's the good news for folks. You can take some steps. Like, you can do something. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. So I think we'll talk about that too. And okay, maybe for now you're not ready to dive in. That's okay. You can dip your toe and take a few steps and get going, because to your point where you started, at the end of the day, the technology exists to make tasks significantly faster. And so one of the many reasons why the billable hour is terrible is it doesn't compensate us for the value that we're delivering to our clients. I talked to someone yesterday who was like, I can review templates, I can review documents in 10, 20 minutes. If I bill by the hour, I don't get the value of all the time and expertise and knowledge it took for me to get to the place where I could do it very quickly.
Right. Well, so on March 12th, come to the Lawyerist Alternative Fee Structures webinar and listen to Stephanie talk about that. And I'm sure you'll get some good ideas and learn some nice first steps.
Yeah, we'll make sure the registration link is in the show notes, so head there.
And now here is Stephanie's conversation with Rho. And as always, if you like today's episode, take a second while your coffee is brewing and leave us a review in Apple Reviews.
Hello, I am Rho Thomas. I'm a money coach for lawyers, and I am really excited to have this conversation with you today, Stephanie.
Yes, I am excited too, Rho, because money and personal finances, we see way too many lawyers really struggling in this area. So I'm, excited to dig in and learn more about what you do and how you help lawyers get out of debt.
Yeah.
So let's start with, obviously there's law school and it's expensive. I mean, the costs today are crazy. I can't even believe compared to what I spent when I went to school. But what do you see lawyers really struggling with when they're coming to you? Tell me, it's paint the picture. What's happening with them?
Yes, the biggest thing is hands down student loans, followed by credit card debt, personal loans, like the more consumer debt. And I will say, I don't know how much the audience would be familiar with my story, but for those who aren't familiar, I am a lawyer as well. I practiced law for 7 years, and I got into personal finance because of my own journey with my own debt. I wanted to go part-time after I had my first child, so I was working with a firm that allowed for this percentage-based salary for people who wanted to reduce their hours. So you could do a percentage of the billable hour requirement for that same percentage of your salary. So I was interested in doing that, but the student loan debt, like all of this debt that we had, kept us from being able to do it. We couldn't afford a pay cut. And so that got me into learning more about personal finance. And then in that, I found all of these other lawyers who also didn't know what was going on because I thought it was just us. So being in that position myself, I saw exactly how that felt. I understand exactly how it feels to be a lawyer. You're smart, you're this type A person, always been ahead of the game, except this one area where I personally felt like I was failing. And so being able to dig out of that and find these different resources, I'm really glad to be able to share that with other lawyers who are in that same situation that we were in.
Yeah, I love that you kind of start with, hey, no shame. A lot of us are in this boat. I mean, law school kind of starts us there and sort of puts us in this big hole. But I would imagine, I don't know what you see, but just my experience in seeing people that I graduated with, it feels like we went out and we got jobs after law school and we're making a little money. And it was like, oh, maybe I can buy a new car. Or I can buy a new, like fill in the blank, because there is sort of a certain lifestyle expectation that I think we have. I mean,
Yeah, I think
so
that's 100% right. And like you said, it starts in law school. So the average that I see, this is not, data based or anything like that. Anecdotally, the average that I'm seeing is about 200,000 in student loans. Some people have a little less, some people have a little more, but they're coming out and the minimum payment on that, if they're on the standard plan, tends to be around $2,000 a month. Right. So we've got this minimum payment on the student loans. And then there is that desire to get a certain house because I'm a lawyer now, or to get a certain car or whatever. And so then we start piling on these minimum payments on top of the student loan payment. And we are making more because most of us weren't making anything in law school. We're making more, but then we start pulling at that amount. It's like, oh, minimum payment here, minimum payment there, until we get to the point where there's very little cash flow going on, right? Like we're making a lot of money, but we feel like we're living paycheck to paycheck, and many people are. And so getting control of that cash flow, learning how to create a gap between your income and your expenses is critical to be able to progress with your finances the way most lawyers want to do.
yeah. Well, I mean, how do people you reminded me, I saw a visual recently and it was talking about like, what do you have in your buckets? And 401k was like small. And then I can't remember now what the second bucket was, but the third bucket was brunch. And it made me laugh because it had the most amount of money in it. And I was like, oh yeah, that resonates. Like someone told me it's like, they called it lifestyle creep, where, I know for me, often I'm like, at the end of the month, I'm like, why do I not have more? Like, where did all the money go throughout the month? I'm spending it and I don't even sometimes realize, or I'm not being intentional about where that go. And that idea of lifestyle creep is what I think someone said. I'm sure
Yes.
you probably see a lot of that.
Absolutely. Lifestyle creep is something that we all experience, right? Like I don't live the way that I was living when I was in law school now, 10 years out, right?
Right.
Most of us are not living that same way. And I don't think that that's necessarily bad. But the word that you use, Stephanie, that I love is intention. Because often we are not spending with any sort of intention. The extent of the strategy for me, like before we got on this whole thing and tried to get our finances in order, the extent of the strategy was, is there money in the account? Oh yeah, okay, I can buy that. I can go spend that, right? And so we end up in these situations where we're making more, but we continue to spend more. We have that lifestyle creep. And then we don't feel the extent of that additional income. And so one of the things that I tell people all the time is making more is not the answer. Like we often think if I just make a little more money, then I'll be good. If I could just get to this income, then I'd be good. But it's not true, because the issue is always in how we manage the money that we make. If we're not managing what we're making now, we're not going to be managing more any better. And so, like you said, that
Yes.
lifestyle creep comes in where I'm not paying attention to what's going on. I'm not spending with any sort of intention. I'm making more, and now that gets spent. And then I feel if I could just make a little bit more, then I'd be okay. And that goalpost just keeps moving. And it's all because there's that lifestyle creep happening.
Yes. Okay. I suspect, because maybe I feel this a little bit, that one of the things you might run up against is because I agree with everything you just said. And what I heard in that is, so that means, Stephanie, you need to spend a little less, right? I think, is that fair? That's part of your message?
Possibly. It
Okay.
depends. Yeah,
Yeah.
so spending less could be part of it, but not necessarily, right? It could be making more. Maybe there are things that you could be doing to bring in more income. The goal is to increase the space between the income that you're making and what you're spending out. For many of my clients, it is spending less. They don't want to, bring on another job or have a side hustle or, that kind of thing. That is something that my husband and I did. Like he got a second job for a little bit. I had a side hustle selling stuff around the house. All of that was money that we were not used to having. And so we were able to use that for our goals. But a lot of people don't want to do that. And so if you're not going to bring in more income, then yeah, you're going to have to spend less. However, it does not have to look like what we often hear, which is like, stop buying lattes, stop going to brunch, just sit at home, stare at the wall, like eat
Yes.
ramen, right? So
That's
I
where I
tell
was
my
going to go. I
clients,
was like, because people
yeah,
kind of feel like, I would imagine people come to you and they're like, but I want to live, like, I want to go out to eat. Like, I don't want to cook
yeah.
every meal, right? Like, I
And
enjoy
I
doing
want
these
you to.
things. Okay.
And so what I tell my people is, let's look at what's important to you. Like, what is it that you actually value? And let's make sure that we're spending on those things. Because what I have found is a lot of lawyers spend a lot of money on stuff that they don't actually care about. And like you talked about going out to eat, like the brunch bucket, all of that, that's so real. And often people are spending thousands of dollars going out to eat for just one person or just two people, and they don't realize that they're spending that much because each encounter, each time going out isn't that much, but it all adds up. And so it's going back to that word that you use. I love that you use the word intention because I am all about intention, right? When you can use your money intentionally, you can say, yes, I like going out to eat. I'm going to go out to eat this much, but I also like this thing. I also like shopping. I also like whatever it is. And so I'm going to allocate money for that as well. And then I also like having some money. I also like being able to have savings for when those emergency things come up and I don't want to have to put it on my credit card. So I'm going to allocate money to that as well. And it's all about planning how you're going to use that money on the front end instead of looking back, wishing that I had done something differently, wishing that I had more money in my account.
Yeah. I once read, I think, that a lot of people think of a budget, right, as a limiting word, like it's constraining me. And to flip that around and say, actually, your budget can be very liberating because it's giving you permission, like, going in, I have permission to spend this amount of money. I'm going to try to stay within that parameter. But I think that mindset shift probably could be really impactful because I think people hear the budget word and shy away.
Yeah, 100%. I've actually stopped using the word budget as much. Early on, like when I first started my business, I was always talking about budget, budget, budget. But as you said, a lot of people don't like that word. And I think it conjures up this image of the deprivation, eating ramen. I can't do this. I can't do that. And so I just talk about planning your spending, which is really what a budget is, right? It's about
Right.
planning your spending. If if saying spending plan feels better for people, that is perfectly fine. The goal is to make sure that we are being intentional with how we're using our money. And that way we can spend on those things that we enjoy. We can still make progress on our goals, still make sure our needs are met, but we aren't running out of money. We're not feeling the squeeze all the time. And one of my favorite things, I teach my clients to have a fun money account. So you've got your main, account that you're paying your bills out of, you're buying your groceries, whatever. We're going to open up a separate account just for fun money. And this is money that you're putting in there for you to spend on fun, on things that you enjoy. And you're planning it, right? So it's not just like, oh, I'm just going to put half my check in the fun money and just,
Right.
ball out. We're not doing that. But you're able to have this set amount of money that you have planned on spending on these things that you enjoy. And so that way, when you're spending on those things, you don't feel guilt or shame. Like that comes up a lot of times for people where they spend on something that they want, but then they feel bad about it because I should have used that for something more responsible. I should have done this. I should have done that. When you plan for it on the front end and you've got this set account over here, like you're giving yourself permission to spend this money on whatever you want to spend on. So then you don't have to feel guilty about it. You
Yeah.
know that your needs are still going to be taken care of. Your bills are covered. You're saving or paying off debt or investing or whatever goals you have. And now I can use this money however I want to.
Yes, agree. We have a travel budget for our family, and we agreed this is like travel is important to us, and so we put a certain amount of money in a separate account that's a interest bearing account every month, and that's the travel fund, and we use that to plan vacations. Um, and the reason we're able to do as much as we are for that budget, and this is kind of where I'm coming a long way to my question. We decided a couple of years ago, we really took a hard look at our house. We had bought a house when I was practicing law. It was downtown. I didn't have to commute, I had to commute to the office. And all of a sudden during the pandemic, we were like, I work from home now. I don't have to travel and have this commute. So we ended up selling our house, moving out a little bit into the suburbs, and we cut our mortgage in like half. I mean, we paid less than half for the house we sold. And we said when we did that, now we're going to put some money in this travel account. Like we're choosing to travel over having a nice big house in town. And that was the first time for me that I thought about like really making a big decision. Like sometimes we talk about lattes. I mean, like, okay, a couple dollars here or there. That was a big money decision. And I was curious because you said you and your husband decided to do some side hustle job. He took a second job. That also feels kind of like that could be bigger and needle moving. So I'm curious kind of what kind of big decisions do you see folks making that can really maybe accelerate or make a dent in what they're doing when it comes to their cash flow and how they're spending money?
I love that you shared your personal experience with downsizing, getting a house that, costs less. I don't know if the actual house was smaller, but getting a house that costs less because you're absolutely right. Those big things like your house, like the car you drive, like the activities or maybe the schools that your kids are in, if they're in private school versus public school versus something else, all of those things are going to move the needle a lot more than not buying a latte today, right? Than not having avocado toast, if that's still a thing.
Yeah.
And I think the housing one especially is big because I have seen people get into situations where their housing is taking up half of their income, 70% of their income, like these really huge chunks. And when you've got a big expense like that, where 50% to 70% of your income is going just to this one bill, it leaves a lot less for all the other things that you need, all the other things that you want, and your goals. So, one of the things that I tell people with respect to housing is if you can keep your housing costs to, say like 25% or so of your take home pay. If it's a little bit more than that, it's not the end of the world, especially depending on other things that you have going on. Like, let's say you don't have student loans, like you've paid your student loans off, or you don't have credit card debt or things like that, where you've got a little bit more wiggle room, you might be able to go a little bit beyond that. But when we're getting to, 40, 50, 60, like these really large chunks of money, it makes it a lot harder to be able to do things like have a vacation fund or even to have that savings for unexpected expenses. So housing is definitely one of the big needle movers. I think the same is true of what the car you drive, right? If you have a car payment that's $1,000 a month, well, that's $1,000 that can't go to something else. And then often a car that has $1,000 a month car payment has much higher expenses with respect to the maintenance, with respect to gas, like all of those kinds of things. So it's not just about this single purchase, it's all of the ancillary purchases that go along with it. And then the third one that tends to be big, actually, there are two more that tend to be big. The third one that tends to be big is food, which we talked about, right? The brunch bucket,
Yeah,
the
that
spending
avocado
thousands.
toast is expensive.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
And so it's looking at the food costs. Like, do I want to get all my meals out or could I cook at home sometime? Maybe instead of doing Uber Eats, because let me tell you this story. I've told this story recently. I went to order a pizza one time on Uber Eats from a place up the street. The pizza itself was $20. But then after fees and stuff, it was like $40. And that wasn't even including the tip. And I was like, I'm going to just drive and go get the pizza, right? So like sometimes we can save money by doing things like that. Like I'm not going to get it on the app or I'm not going to get it delivered. I'm going to go in person. I can still have that meal out, but I'm able to do it in a more efficient way, if that makes sense. But just watching how much we're spending on those things. And then the fourth one is the minimum debt payments. Like, I think it's really easy for those payments to start adding up, It's like you can get everything on payments these days. You can, you've got your house, you've got your car, you've got your student loans, but then I've got this credit card. Maybe I took on a personal loan for something. I did the Afterpay or the Klarna and like those things like, oh, it's only 4 payments of X. But if you do that over and over again, all of that starts adding up. So I think those things are much bigger needle movers than not going to Starbucks.
Yes. One dilemma I think sometimes people face, especially when they're kind of just coming out, but maybe even now, like the struggle of, do I invest or do I pay off debt? And at what ratio should I be doing those two things? Because, and so I'm just kind of curious how you address that question.
Yeah. So I must caveat this by saying I am not a financial advisor. I'm not licensed to give you any specific financial advice. I want no problems with the SEC.
Fair enough.
However, my thoughts on the investing versus debt question, I like to look at the math, looking at the numbers of things, right? So typically, if we're talking about investing in the stock market, on average, you're going to get like an 8% return. 8 to 10% is like what we typically see. A lot of times people have credit cards that have 20%, 30%, stuff like that. So like when you've got these really high interest debts, then it might make sense to pay those off before you focus more on investing. With the caveat that like if you are in a firm or something where you're getting a match on your 401k, like being able to put that money in to get the match might make sense. It also might not. I've actually had situations where clients had so much going on in terms of the debt payments and all of that was coming out, they were kind of over investing and it was making them go deeper into debt because they didn't have enough money coming into their checking account to cover their expenses, right? It's like it's all a math problem, looking at what's happening, looking at these numbers. I'll say in my own personal experience, my husband and I maxed out our retirement accounts the first year that we were working, the first 2 years maybe. But then when we got into this whole money journey where I wanted to go part-time, we couldn't afford it. We're looking at it and we had $678,000 of debt and the majority of our student loans were at 6.9 and 7.8%, right? So it was these huge interest rates. And like I said, you can expect about 8% on average to be your return in the stock market. So we didn't realize that what we were doing with our retirement accounts was basically getting canceled out by the interest that was accruing on all this debt. And so we decided to drop our contributions to just get the match. It was like 3% or so. And then we used the rest of that money to start tackling the debt because our debt was just kind of growing. It wasn't
Right.
like because of the way that the math worked out, the interest rates were about the same. It wasn't, exponentially better to put it into the retirement account versus paying on the debt or vice versa. So that was a decision that we made. But again, it comes down for me to the math of it. So I like to look at like, okay, if I'm getting about 8% in this investment and I'm paying 30% on, this debt, maybe it makes more sense instead of putting that money into the investment right now to pay on the debt. If it's something where things are kind of a wash, like in our situation, it kind of depends again on your numbers. Like for us, because of the amount of debt we had, our minimum payments were like $3,500 a month. That was a lot of money, like a big chunk of change coming out
Yeah.
every month. And we wanted to not pay that. And so we decided to decrease the retirement contributions to be able to pay that off and decrease the amount that we were having to pay out each month. So that's how I think about that decision. I do think that it is deeply personal. It
Mhm.
is, situational. Like each person might have a different outcome or might have a different situation that makes more sense for them. And so definitely reach out to a financial planner or someone like that who can help you if you need professional help in making that decision.
Absolutely. And and I know, because I know, I've read your story. You and your husband were able to get out of your debt. I think the only debt you really have now is your mortgage, which is fair. Most people do. I'm curious, how long did it take you guys? Like, it sounds like you got really focused and you said, okay, we're gonna do this. You know, how long did it take for you to knock that debt down?
Yeah, it took a little under 6 years, maybe about 5 years, something like that. And a big part of that, honestly, was the pause in the pandemic where interest wasn't accruing, because that was the thing that was really killing us. Like, we had this multiple six-figure debt. We were accruing all this interest, and you make a payment, but like this little bitty portion went to the principal. So being able to make payments where they were all principal only, like really accelerated that. But I think before the pandemic, we were on track for something like 7 or 8 years.
Okay. Well, congratulations. I feel like we should
Thank
acknowledge
you.
that because that has got to feel amazing. I guess the last thing I'd love to talk about in the time we have left, I'm just still kind of fascinated by the fact that you guys decided to try to increase your income to pay off your debt with additional jobs. And I'm imagining if I'm listening right now, I might be thinking, do you know how hard I already work, like Ro? Like what now you want me to do more or take on a side hustle or a second job? And so I imagine you hear that a lot from lawyers. And I'm just kind of curious if you could give us some more thoughts around, what is actually reasonable or possible there.
Yeah, I think it really depends on each person, right? So in my situation, early on, I was selling things around the house. It was a very light lift. Like, okay, there was an app, I don't know if it's still around, but it was called OfferUp. And I would take pictures of these items. We had an infant who was outgrowing things before we even had a chance to put them on him, that kind of stuff. And so I would take pictures of the items. And then if someone wanted the item, then I would just bring it with me to work and I would have them meet me somewhere around my firm. So it was very easy. They would just, either pay me in cash or pay me PayPal, and that was that.
Yeah.
On my husband's side, so he was a resident at the time and he took on a job at a clinic on weekends. And that really sucked. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to
Yeah.
sugarcoat it. Like, he was gone every weekend and he was already working a lot during the week. And then I'm a junior associate and we got this baby. Like, it was tough, but the thing that was helpful for us was bringing in that extra income allowed us to kind of make initial progress, right? So we didn't have that income before. And so we're able to use that income to start paying off some things. And, once you pay off a debt, now you don't have that minimum payment anymore. And so then that started opening up cash flow for us. Him taking on that second job was not all about personal finance. Like, part of it was he was going to be graduating from residency soon. He wanted to have some experience with handling patients without the supervision of his attending, that kind of thing. So there was some professional parts to it, but having that extra income coming in definitely accelerated our journey on the front end. I've had people do things like teach classes at their local gym. There was one guy who was really into smoothies, and so he took on some shifts at Smoothie King, and he got these discounts at smoothies. So like, it doesn't have to be something that is super time consuming or something that's completely different from what you're already doing. But if you don't want to make extra income, that's okay, right? Like, you don't
Right.
have to. It could also just be managing your expenses differently, because the cash flow equation goes both ways. It's making more income, spending less.
Absolutely. And we're not going to be able to cover it today, and I understand like the limits of what you can advise on. But I think the follow up to this show is going to be, okay, now we need to know what to do next. So we're paying off our debt, we have more income coming in, and we want to build our net worth. Like that should be the goal for most people. And I don't know that we always talk about that, but really kind of building up. Um, all the buckets, right? My financial planner always talks about the buckets. So it's like, okay, and then and now, building in things that eventually will be investing in things that could be income producing, so that, we're not just planning for retirement, but we're planning for lots of different options. So I appreciate this conversation because I think getting the debt under control is kind of step one. And then I want to let people know, like, stay tuned. So start working on that if you haven't already, and then we want to work on how do we like really build your net worth.
Yeah. And if we still have a minute, can I speak to that a little bit?
Please.
There is a lot that comes from managing that cash flow better, putting more of it towards your savings, putting it towards your debt. Like, those things are still things that increase your net worth, because your net worth is how many assets you have, like the value of your assets minus the debts that you have. So when you have less debt, that increases your net worth. When you've got more in your savings account, that increases your net worth. And when you have more cash flow, then you're able to put those things towards your investments. So in my personal experience, I mentioned that we had $678,000 of debt. We also had a negative $342,000 net worth. And we went from that negative $342,000 net worth to a positive $500,000 net worth, mostly just focused on the getting out of debt, the making sure that we had our savings. There was some investing, like I mentioned, that we were doing about 3% in our retirement accounts. And then we also were putting about $100 a month into a separate investment account. And that was a compromise. My husband wanted to continue saving. And you mentioned having a high yield savings account. Back when we started, the high yield savings account was paying like 1%.
Yeah.
And so it didn't make sense to me to put money into the savings when we've got all this debt at these, 9%, 10% interest rates and such. And so the compromise was investing that $100. So we did, $100 a month and 3% in our retirement accounts. But the rest of it was directing that cash flow towards building up our savings and then paying off debt. And that took us from negative 342,000 to positive 500,000. And then once we were done paying off the debt, we had all of this money that we could just start piling into investments.
Love
So
it.
don't discount the power of focusing on getting your savings, like getting yourself into a more stable financial position and paying down those debts, because then that's going to just accelerate your investment trajectory.
Absolutely. And the last thing that I heard there, and, those who might remember the episode I did with Rho Thomas, who talks about healthy financial relationships, which is what you just said. You and your husband, you guys were lockstep talking about this. You had it, and I'm sure those were some hard conversations at times, but you got on the same page. You came up with a plan that you both agreed to, and then you both make the commitment. I think that's so important, because even now we've done that in our family, and we've included our almost 14-year-old with it. And the other night after soccer, they were like, can we just stop and get some takeout on the way home? And I was like, no, you know what? No, it's Wednesday. We have a plan. We're going to eat out this weekend. I've got dinner. Like, let's go home and eat what I already have purchased. And that's like a small victory, but that's what you need. You need that accountability for each other, because, it could have just as easily been me that was like, let's just go out. I don't feel like cooking. And then my kid would look at me and be like, but Mom, we said we're not eating out until the weekend. And I'd be like, womp, womp, you're right.
Yeah, and one of the big things, especially if you are in a partnership or romantic relationship where you're managing money with someone else, like the thing that I always tell people is don't make the mistake that I made, which was talking about what we need to do. If we just cut this, if we just start doing this, then we could pay this off. This person says that we could do this and that person did X, Y, Z. Don't go tell your partner that Rho says we should blah, 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 blah. Your partner does not care. They don't know me. They don't care what I did or what I have to do. So what helped was when we got in that situation where I wasn't able to do the part-time thing because of our finances, that got me thinking about the vision that I had for our family, what I wanted to be able to do, the kind of mom that I wanted to be for our kids, and how the finances impacted that. And so we started dreaming together about what our life could look like, what his vision was for our family. Like, what if we did this, that, and the third, right? And that conversation then backed us into the financial conversation. And that helped us to get on the same page. Because my husband did not care anything about this, like paying off student loans. He's like, everybody has student loans. It's fine. He was ready to live his life. And I was trying to tell him about these things that I had seen. But when we came more from the life that we want to live, what could that life look like, all of that stuff, then we were able to have much more productive conversations about our finances and get on the same page.
That is amazing advice, and I love that. Start with your vision. Rho, thank you so much for being with me today. I know that this has helped so many people in the work that you're doing. We'll make sure we'll put how you can get in contact with Rho on the show notes, and go to her website. She also has a podcast where she's digging more into financial matters. So I encourage you to check that out as well. So thank you. Oh, wait. Yeah, and Rho, you have a special gift for our listeners, right?
I do. Yes. If you head to rhothomas.com/lawyerist, you can get a free copy of a guide that I put together on the top 5 mistakes that I see lawyers make when they're trying to get out of debt. So you can correct those if you're making them and start moving yourself forward to getting out of debt and getting your finances on track.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.